Hello and welcome to another week of the Story Arcs podcast. I'm your co-host Mike.
And I'm your co-host Alex.
And today we are joined by a very special guest, Marcus Toe. Welcome, Marcus.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming. This is the most perfect segue we've ever had for a podcast because we just finished 4 weeks of talking about Joyride, and next week we're starting Hacktivist.
You're going to be tired of me real soon.
Yeah, it wasn't planned that way, but as we were talking about Joyride and we go through and talk about kind of all the creators and what they've done, looking back at the work that you have done with Jackson Lanzing and Collin Kelly, I know that early work was Hacktivist, and I was describing the book to Mike and it's a couple of tech geniuses, tech billionaires who are actually like white hat hackers, like they're the good guys secretly. And Mike had this look of like, well, gee, that's like in our current day, that's such a foreign concept that the tech billionaire would be the good guys.
Where are those guys? Where are they?
So an idea spun out of that of being like, in the 10 some odd years since that book, our relationship to technology and social media has changed so drastically. And so we decided to make a theme out of it, starting with Hacktivist and working our way from like every couple years, finding a different comic that deals with kind of social media and technology and our addictions to our phones and things like that, and seeing how that's progressed. And the idea started because Hacktivist at the time seemed like such a wild, what if. And now you think about, you're like, God, there's not a single tech billionaire that you would imagine being secretly a good guy or even like overtly a good guy,
Yeah. No doubt. I mean, that idea specifically was an Alyssa Milano. She came up with the idea because of her friendship with Jack Dorsey, and that was her kind of like hopefulness for the future. I know Alyssa Milano's quite an activist herself, and she kind of married the two ideas. But you're right, after kind of a lot of the things that went on, it became more fantasy than anything. But it was a fun project to work on nonetheless.
Yeah, actually, we'll go and start there since we do want to mainly focus on Joyride. But as you mentioned, I know that was an idea, and I assume that was an idea that Alyssa Milano had brought to Boom, I guess, and then they started working on it. And then is that how you guys came in? Like they brought in Jackson and Collin as writers, and then brought you on as an artist. Like, how did that team come together? How did that project come together once that idea came to Boom?
Well, I mean, from what I understand, it kind of came together pretty fast. So this was around the time where Archaea was bought out by Boom, and my friend Stephen Christie, who I have worked with on the American version of Cyborg 009 with Archaea, we got together for that book. And when Boom bought Archaea, Stephen went along with Archaea. And then, my name was being put around the office by Stephen. And they kind of, I was available at the time as well. So they kind of put together this team, marrying those two ideas together. And I don't know how Jackson and Collin got involved, but I know that they had a really good working relationship with Alyssa, and I think she really liked them. So I don't know if she handpicked them or there was a discussion with them, because I know they were pretty green at the time for comic book stuff.
They don't have a lot in front of them in terms of like a big CV where they could have gone and seen a lot of the work, versus you had almost a decade at that point.
Pretty close to it, yeah.
I mean, so you had some work out there, but the two of them really didn't at the time.
I think Jack had a lot of like ghostwriting stuff with TV, and I think with that experience, it worked pretty well with what Alyssa wanted to do. And honestly, like working with Alyssa was great. Like she was not. She, obviously was her vision and all that, but she really let us do our thing, and she was a great collaborator. I have nothing but great things to say about Alyssa.
Awesome. And then, so out of that, is that where the idea for, so I guess then where did Joyride come from? Did it, because I'm assuming at that point you didn't know either Jackson or Collin, and then you guys start working together. So what was the origin of Joyride? Is it an idea that one of you had, or did
this idea actually came way before that? Like I came up with this idea in grade 11.
Oh, wow.
And I had already drawn like 3 issues when I was in high school. Now, this is like way different than what we did, but it was just kind of like the genesis of this idea because, when I was in high school, I came up with this, basically the stock idea that a group of friends that was coming from the future Earth where basically everything became, everyone was scared of everything else. So they built this big shield around the Earth. And it was this group of friends that kind of escaped Earth to basically search the stars for adventure. And wrote and drew 3 issues when I was in high school, and I had this idea for a long, long time. So Steven at the time, he still is, but when RKO was bought by Boom, Steven went along with them, and he was pushing for these original IPs, right? So because I've had a working relation with Steven, he's like, do you have an idea that you want to push to me? And then so I told him, I had this idea since high school. And, this also came along the time when I was really heavily, and I still am, but I was really into Star Trek. Like I got into Star Trek for kind of late in my life, in my mid-20s. And I just really liked that kind of episodic story idea, sci-fi stuff about, strong moral codes, but also, tackling very relevant events. And I thought that this would be a fun thing to try to do. And when I spoke to Jackson and Collin about it, while we were working on Hacktivist, found out that they were huge Star Trek fans as well. And they loved the idea. So we kind of, we basically had already a strong kind of relationship with the whole thing right off the bat, including, like I said, with Steven, and he pushed it through Boom, and we ended up working with a few editors there, and basically that's kind of how it started.
That's cool. I have more questions about Boom, but I want to jump down on my list of stuff here because I wanted to get to it. The thing that I always loved, one thing I loved about the book was the regulators, the characters. They were so Star Trek coded from how their uniforms and their ships, and it was clear that was meant to be intentional. But now hearing you talk about your love for it, and obviously our listeners can't see, but behind you have models of various Star Trek ships, and so it's very present for you. So my question was going to be like, was that a note in the script or something you guys talked about? And clearly it seems like maybe something you guys had talked about beforehand of like, you wanted to put some homage or whatever you want to call it to Star Trek or.
Yeah. So even at the very beginning, we thought like character arc wise, we wanted a certain kind of relationship, the holy trinity of Kirk, Spock, and Bones.
Sure.
We wanted to have that level of kind of, well, we were hoping, to have that level of dynamics with the characters, with everybody. And their adventures would be them, like what if Kirk, Spock, and Bones were teenagers and were just by themselves going into space. And then each story we kind of threw in little bits like, what if we did Breakfast Club but them in space jail, or like what if it was them but a Scooby-Doo adventure, right, where they would find a haunted ship and whatever, right? And so each story we kind of played around with those what if, well, let's put those characters but in something fun that we've seen before, almost tropish, but colored different. So when it came to the regulators, and, obviously, like we were doing this for years ago, so I don't even really remember how it all came to be, but we wanted kind of like basically the idea that their adventures had consequences, and all the culmination of all their fun actually caused a ripple effect. And, with our quote unquote federation, it kind of sparked a kind of, Earth exists and they're ready to kind of like be a part of this whole galaxy or universe of things. So and then that obviously brought them to Earth and caused like a change in what Earthlings viewed space to be as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
How wild was it to eventually then for you guys to then actually work on Star Trek comics, like down the line?
Well, I used to make a rule that as a fan of something, I'd rather not work on it because
I can see that.
sometimes it kind of, when you see how the sausage is made, sometimes it changes things. But there was two reasons why I jumped onto Star Trek for that run. One was Jackson and Collin were writing it, so I already knew that we had a connection of what we wanted to do, and I understood what their storytelling techniques and things like that. But Heather Antos, who was the editor of Star Trek, she was fantastic because one of the great strengths of Heather was that she was our barrier with Paramount. So we didn't because sometimes when you work for larger companies like that, there's a lot of, I wouldn't say interference, but there's a lot of structure that you have to kind of get approvals for. And Heather was really, really good at protecting us from that side of things. Like she would relay information, just the important information to us, and she backed us up in our styles, our ideas, and she really championed us. So I really mostly done it for those two reasons.
Awesome. I guess jumping back real quick to the beginning or the beginning of Joyride. So issue 1 very clearly on the cover says number 1 of 4.
Yeah.
And then that immediately goes away on issue 2. And so what was the publishing, I guess maybe back and forth with the intention was it was going to be a 4-issue series? Because at the time for Boom, as I can recall it, that was pretty standard. Like you get 3 or 4 issues of a book, and then that's what it is. But it seems like you guys got an order to go longer. Was it at that point, did it like, hey, it's an ongoing until it ends, or were you given then 12? Like what was the back and forth there on how you went from what was clearly meant to be 4 issues to where you got, which was 12?
Yeah, honestly, comics in general is a funny world that we navigate and work in. And I don't know what went on behind the scenes for that reason. I know that I'm very lucky. I realize I'm very lucky. I had champions in there to push for more because that was our plan in the first place. I think they were not skeptical, but playing it safe, right? But like I said, like working in this industry, you have to, no matter how good you are, or maybe how good you think you are, you always need some champion in behind the scenes to push you with the higher ups. And I was very lucky to have both Daphne, who was my editor there, Rebecca Taylor, who was my editor at Hacktivist on that book, and Stephen Christie, and those 3 people really kind of championed that book, and still do, to be honest with you, because we still have it out there to try to be a TV show or a movie or something like that.
Sure.
People are still knocking on doors for us. So
all right, was there anything then at what point did you get notice that it was going to end at 12? Because you get to the end of 12 and that very much feels like the end of what the story was supposed to be, or at least it doesn't end on a cliffhanger, I guess. Like it wasn't like you guys got to 12 and it was cut off. So you get to some resolution there, but were there, I mean, the way you describe it, comparing it in a way to Star Trek, the idea that there could have been all these different episodes and threads they could have gone to. Did you guys get to the end that you were thought for the series? Whether it was 4 issues, 12 issues, 20 issues, whatever it was that the end, like of them coming back to Earth? Was that kind of what you had in mind eventually? You just had to get there at 12 issues now, or were there other ways you could have gone and you just got enough notice where you could end it?
I mean, there were other ways we could have gone with it for sure. And we were even toying around with the idea of what the possibilities looked like if we were to continue it after 12. But, like I said, the logistics of the comic book world is that it doesn't always necessarily go the way you want it. So I think we're happy with what we did with 12. For sure we had way more stories that we wanted to write, but we all had already at the beginning had kind of a plan that if we had to close it, this is how we would have done it. So what was lucky was that they gave us the space to do it and not just like, oh, it's over.
Yeah.
Right. So when we got I can't even remember, we got like two-ish issues or something like that to basically close it off. So that's pretty rare.
Indeed.
They were really good to us.
That's good. Because a lot of times how many countless number of series that go and go and go and then just, oh wait, it's done. Like that's the last issue. And either you have like a wrap up of like 4 pages or something, or it just ends and then you never know what happens. And that's,
and then
you don't get the runway to close it.
Yeah. For me, it's always that I will see like years later when I go to update my like subscription list on Comic Geeks, it's like, hey, you're still subscribed to this series from 2018. Still waiting on issue 5. But the solicits are out for it. Yeah.
I mean, I was a huge fan of Battle Chasers, and that's a that's a famous one.
Joe Mad. That did came back though, right? That came back.
Yeah, true.
Eventually, right? Last year maybe, like issue 11 or something like that. Ago. It was like 11 years or something like that. I think my brother.
More than that. I think it was like 20 years. Almost.
It might have been something like that. Yeah. So it's possible. It's possible. Yeah. A long enough break, you can come back to a book eventually.
Yeah. Well, we always joke about it because like our criteria for the podcast is we do like book club style discussions, indie and creator owned only, and they have to be completed series, not like something currently ongoing. So. It's this very narrow thing we have to thread. And I think we might just eventually break down and say, like, okay, over the winter, we're just going to do this total hodgepodge of every unfinished book we've ever loved.
Yeah.
Because we joke about, like, a book like Morning Glories or something all the time, where it's like, can you imagine doing a book club for 50-some issues and then just having it be over and they never came back to it?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say because, again, like, I'm very, very lucky, and I'll say this over and over again, because, I get along great with Jackson and Collin, so we've always had a very professional yet friendly, relationship. Like, they came to my wedding, and I went to theirs. Like we're close. And so there's that, plus, again, the companies that I've worked for, luckily, have had a lot of faith to at least give me the opportunity to finish things if I need to, and a lot of other aspects that kind of come into play when maybe other books might have stuff that happened between publisher, creator, or whatever reason why it just stopped the way it stopped. I can't say for every one that has ended abruptly, but
Yeah. Well, if you haven't already, just track down the deluxe edition of Mark Russell's Flintstones, because he has a letter in there that was just like, this book was basically his middle finger to the industry because his first book was canceled halfway through. And so he was like, I'm just leaving it all on the table, and it is a bananas book.
Yeah.
But anyway, back to your books. Well, let's see. We had just started Joyride, right? I'm trying to catch up to where we were in the conversation.
Well, I know, Mike. We were talking before. You had a question about some of the.
Oh yeah, well,
art. Yeah, if you want to jump in on that.
This actually applies to Hacktivist because, and this is total just insider baseball thing. We think this is interesting.
Okay.
There are lyrics in the final or penultimate issue. So one, I'm curious about the different choices of music, because Alex and I had this big debate. I was like, okay, well, maybe they're in a world where like music and art stopped happening, so they have to go back to this era. Because I'm like, kids in the future, are they really listening to like, Radiohead and Rolling Stones,
the Beatles,
or whatever it was.
NWA, and the Stones.
NWA, yeah. And then I was like, and then the market for this book seemed like a teenage audience in the 2015s, and I was like, will they need to be told these are songs? So one, I'm curious about that. Second, I'm curious about when those letters appear, like not in a letter box. Is that part of your art, or is that given to the letterer?
So it's most out that specific bit is Jackson and Collin for sure. You know that there's like a
A
Spotify playlist
playlist,
for
yeah.
each
Yes, yeah,
volume,
yeah.
right? So they came up with all that, and but initially the idea, of course, was that one of the reasons why Earth had become so xenophobic was the fear of the outside world, basically the universe, right? And part of that was the part of what would have was happened in the past in canon, I guess, was that the government started controlling all sorts of transmissions. So like anything that you would see, read, watch, and listen to would be government run. And we had so part of this idea that I had in school was kind of married with my mom's story of growing up in during the Cultural Revolution, and how my mom had a story. She told me a story a long time ago, was that the last time she saw her family, so during that time, she grew up in Guangzhou, China, and it's close to Hong Kong, right? So at the time, a lot of people weren't allowed to leave, but if like one or two of your youngest children were allowed to like go somewhere with or grandparents, basically they wanted to keep all the able-bodied people in the country working for them. So my mom and her grandma were sent to Hong Kong to live. And so during the Cultural Revolution, they kind of didn't like having anything that wasn't Chinese. Like it's like, pro-nationalism, pro-everything, pro-China, but Hong Kong was obviously British controlled. So when she went to school, she would wear, like British school uniforms. And because they were poor, that's basically all she had to wear. So whenever she went back to China to, say, help deliver like milk or eggs or something, supplies to the family, she got outed once by the shoes that she was wearing from her uniform. So there was like a militia that was roaming the city, and my grandfather in the middle of the night had to put my mom on a train back to Hong Kong, and she didn't see her family for another like 10 years maybe. And so we had, that's kind of how I kind of wrote Earth was like as a whole. And that's why at the very beginning, the pilot issue, I guess you want to call it, she's basically making a deal with someone underground for a cool pair of kicks. So like I was using a lot of those kind of stories in what I had Uma kind of try to rebel against. And so when it came to the music aspect, obviously that's a great parallel to, the controlling of art and culture, was that art and culture was all of a sudden controlled. And then at the very end of the issue or the series, what actually saves them from the regulators is an influx and to show them human culture and, human art. And that's what made them think that, okay, maybe there's more to these humans than, they initially thought.
Yeah. No, I mean, I Mike and I talked about it, like that sort of message. I think we really love the idea that it is art and creation and the diversity of it, and the that feeling of, or that representation of inspiration and creativity is what makes society
Well, we wanted
important.
more.
Yeah,
We even wanted more of like different like songs and lyrics and stuff, but Boom Lua didn't let us because they were scared that we'd get sued.
Oh,
Right. Yeah. Well, that, and like it wouldn't have hurt to had like a Stanley Kubrick movie playing in the background or something, and have the aliens taking in all of our art. But
is there an amount of, in terms of like how much of a song lyric you can have
I
printed
can't
anywhere
remember.
in a book?
There's rules. There's certain rules.
I'm sure there are. Of course there are. Of course there are. Yeah.
Because actually, there was another one that I did where it was just a cover, and it was for the Monkey King, and
Okay.
they were like, "Oh, can you draw a Monkey King?" So Monkey King for Chinese culture is kind of like our guardian or whatever, right? So I know it's stereotyping, but I mean, I'm Chinese, so I like karaoke. So I thought,
It's all
well,
good.
the Monkey King would frickin'
I'm
sing
Korean. It's all
karaoke,
good. You're fine.
right?
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
understand.
So I had him sing Bon Jovi, "Living on a Prayer," and the joke was because the lyrics say like, "We're halfway there, whoa," because in Journey to the West they're always halfway there.
Yeah.
So anyway, he's singing that song, and then DC is like, you can't have those lyrics.
Oh, that's too bad. That's too bad. I guess that does make sense. You can only go so far before it becomes some level of copyright infringement, I guess.
Well,
But I guess
Marvel and DC nowadays they hire people to straight up just read everything that they write. So it's like a someone to make sure that there's we're not doing something that is unintentionally insensitive culturally, or we can get sued by like all the above. And they basically send everything they publish to one or a group of people. I don't know how many people. Can you imagine if it was just one person just
reading all of that.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want the liability for like letting something slip past me as just one person for an entire
Yeah.
company. So I'm sure it's an organization whose whole thing is, hey, we do this so that if someone gets mad at your content, DC can just point the finger and be like, oh no, that wasn't us. That was that was them who didn't catch that. Because and some of the excuses in the past have been really lame. There were some controversial like Avengers issues in the 80s, and it was like the writer being like, I don't know, I wrote it, but I didn't mean it like that. The artist just took liberties with it, and the editor was like, I guess I signed off on it. I don't really remember. So
well, I mean,
anyway.
Here's the thing, right? Like I've been working in comics for like 20 years now, and I when I first started, it was like the Wild West. It was like post. I think it was part of maybe like the third or the fourth Image wave. There's the first wave with Jim and Mark and all those guys. Second wave is I want to say Mike Turner, J. Scott Campbell. Third wave is like Ali Garza, Joe Benitez, and then there was me. That came out of that, and basically third or fourth wave. And we were at the right when Marvel was going bankrupt, and people were saying like the industry's over. And at that time, people were just like, okay, we're not editing anything, just anything that will sell. Just we need any idea that comes this way, we'll do it. So it's different times, and I think we're better for where we are now for sure. But like comics, Wild West, man, we were just throwing stuff at the wall, whatever would sell at that time. So it could be insensitive, it could be wrong, I don't know. But unless if you were working around that time, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy. I mean, see, if an advisory board like that existed back in the day, like we wouldn't have gotten the Shang-Chi that we got originally in Marvel, right? I mean, like that character doesn't come out that way, and it's not like it's easy to go back and be like, well, obviously, when you got a bunch of white creators creating a character based on effectively just like exploitation films, that's what you're going to get, and so the time has to progress to a point where you can have you can have a Chinese character like created, written, drawn, all of that by like a full Chinese creative team, and like that shouldn't seem like a big deal, revolutionary and all that, but like it makes it make like
I think
there aren't a lot of Korean characters out in the world, but like I'm gonna buy them all. And if I see the writer and the artist, like if I know that they're Koreans there, like it means something to me because I didn't have that growing up.
And even when bringing it back to Joyride, like that's kind of why we wanted to touch upon a lot of the censorship. And also like in my headcanon as a creator, I had the idea that all these characters were a mix of basically a mixed bag of, because you think in the future there's a lot of mixing, but I didn't want Earth to have any real culture, so there was no separation between any kind of specific racial cultural divide, because I thought that Earth at that time we were all just like a mix of brown at some point, and dark or light, whatever but there's no real culture, and that's what it was. It was just stale, normal, like whatever. So I didn't. That's why we never touched upon any specific kind of. I don't even know how to say this, but like basically it was just like everyone that came from there was a certain kind of bland, right?
Well, so is that where the abhorrence came from? That idea of like, if society is essentially monoracial or as a mix there, that when introduced to anything that was different, even if they were still human or whatnot, like of Earth, the fact that that was different to them, was that like a parallel to what alien life? Because that was all the things that you're different, in your book, they're all afraid of. Yeah.
That's basically. I mean, we couldn't, because we were going so fast with the story. We didn't touch on it quite so directly, but visually, that's what I wanted to do. Where I had mostly everyone on Earth relatively looking the same, and then so when you go into space, that any specific creature or alien would be bonkers, right? So I mean, and that was mostly the story. It wasn't necessarily about one culture in specific, but you know, it was all of human arts and culture. The idea of censorship that was the kind of the theme that I wanted to kind of put. It's like, basically, I'm pretty anti-censorship, if you hadn't noticed. But as a creator, like that's kind of how I thought, and
seems to
we
make
wanted
sense,
to carry that theme over, and that was kind of the message. But funny enough that we got censored because we weren't allowed to use song lyrics, but that makes sense in its own way, because I don't want to get sued either.
It's a different kind of censorship there. It's not because you can't say it; it's because someone's got to pay for it eventually.
Right? No, it's like you're totally free to say that song lyric, but you are going to pay dearly.
We had already planned that this was going to be a YA book, because we wanted the audience, not that adults couldn't enjoy it, but also with YA books there's a certain level of understanding of, I wouldn't say censorship, but understanding that this is, if it's geared towards younger people, you have to be a little bit more careful about language and different things like that. So there was also an understanding going into that, because that was my thing. I wanted it for a YA audience. In fact, there was, I don't know if I should say this, but there was a point where we were close to getting it sold to a TV show. I'm not going to say who, but they wanted to adult it up. They wanted us to adult it up.
Yeah,
so
which is, but then it's a different story, right?
Yeah, it's a different story.
You lose the whole coming of age piece of it.
Yeah.
Which is really what, like, they have to go leave to find themselves. And, it's like just basic premise of the book. And that's where, they just don't get it. Because
the Battlestar Galactica version of this story doesn't work. Yeah, in my mind, I'm not that's where I go for like adults. The characters being older and being experienced and all like right. The whole premise falls apart if that happens. It just becomes like another show.
And so
space.
at that point, it's like, what do they even think they're buying from you? Like once they fundamentally change it, they're like, we want Star Trek, but we can't afford Star Trek. So why don't you give us your thing, and we'll call it something else. So anyway, well, okay. So, but getting back to those lyrics, when they show up on the page, they feel like part of the art, not part of the lettering.
So this, and I'll give the props to Darren DJ Bennett. He's a letterer on it, and his company. What was this? Anyway. Like
Darren, that's Anworld. Wait, no, did he?
Yeah.
He did Hacktivist.
Yeah. He did all of that. He did Hacktivist. He did Joyride. He did all that stuff. I get him to do everything as much as I can. He hand draws that stuff. Anything that's not, like he obviously makes his own. He makes his own fonts, but if we need something specific, like what you said with the music, he hand draws that stuff.
Does he do sound effects too?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay, because I know we've talked to some artists and some writers that can vary. I guess it varies depending on who the artist is and what the book is like and what that artist does. Sometimes sound effects or anything written in a panel is part of the art. Sometimes it's part of the letter. So it's why we're always curious about the process in terms of like, what is that page? So you draw that page and it doesn't have none of the lyrics there are on that. It's open there. With the understanding
that's the thing I'm not strong at that personally. That's not my strength. So
sure.
I've always been the type that's like, let's hire the guys that do it. You know what I mean? Like I could probably do it, but it wouldn't come across, and that's probably something that I need to work on, obviously, as an artist, like, to be more well-rounded. But especially at the time we're talking about, I think Joyride came, I had left DC, and I was kind of just, because that was my first creator owned. I didn't even know I had the ability to like have that much artistic say. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
I've never done it before. So I think I was still learning, trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and having the right team along with me was really important. And because I worked with DJ on Hacktivist and Cyborg, it's gotta hand it to him to do as much as possible with that.
Sure.
Stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, it looks great on the page, and that's one of Mike and I's kind of favorite pages. They're not just because they're song lyrics from songs that we know and love, but just the visual representation, because you have the lyrics there, you have the screens showing whatever other parts of media from Earth and all that. Just the idea that art and creation kind of flooding in. And the regulars kind of being like overwhelmed, like overstimulated with stuff and all that, I think it's a great visual, and it looks really awesome on the page.
Am I not? I mean, I could be wrong that it isn't Darren, but it might be. I don't know. I have to look. It's been so long.
It has been. It's been
well, I was going to say
over decades in the book. You're probably working on the book, yeah.
Right. I had basically the same question in Hacktivist, because there's lots of action.
Hacktivist, I know Darren did it for sure.
Okay, I was going to say there's lots of click clack, type sounds that are, again, not part of the captions. And then there's also like the terminal, like DOS interface, where you're getting, the big block text. And I was like, I guess that could be done, by the letterer or the artist. But I think there's nothing wrong with passing the ball around as much as you can on a creator-owned project, because that's just kind of spreading the wealth around.
Right? Like comics in general, to do everything yourself takes so much time. It's a lot of times with comics, you really need to pass it on, because, I mean, you need to keep moving. You need to have, if I'm late on stuff, then my colorist is late on his stuff, and then vice versa. Like it goes down the line, and it's really tough to kind of keep it all going. And oftentimes, how the comics industry works is that when they choose, say, like a printing date, they schedule the time with the printer to be like, all right, printer, we'll have X amount of whatever, something, and then the printer will basically have it ready for them, because they just don't have them waiting, right? They'll put in the file, and then they'll be printing for the week or whatever, however long they do it. So you have to schedule that time in, and if you miss that time, you have to like reschedule it in, and they got to figure it out. And it's a lot of these logistics stuff that a lot of fans don't know about.
Yeah, at some point, it becomes an efficiency thing. Yeah, right. Like as if you, it's not that artists who are doing line work can't color their own work or can't do their own lettering or things like that. Yeah, you're right. It becomes like if you're doing that, then you're not working on the next issue. But if you hand the baton off to someone and can keep going, then like that's how books come out in time. Versus, if of course there are some of the creators that I guess are just aliens that are who can cartoon their whole book and of course those people exist. But they're.
I mean, even if you look at like a European style, which is more like an artist. For example, you guys read Black Sad at all?
Oh, I love Black Sad. Yes.
Yeah.
One of my favorite books of all time.
He does one every couple of years, basically.
Yeah.
And everyone will wait for it. And it's perfectly fine, because that's the way, the European style, that's how they absorb the material.
Yeah.
Japan's worse than us in the sense of like, all right, let's have as many, like people work on one thing at a time. And then, like, the main artist will just not always, this isn't always the case, but a lot of the shonen stuff, they have to move so fast that they have to have tons of background artists, inkers, and things like that to kind of keep their ball rolling. So each situation in each industry is slightly different, and ours is just the way, I guess, our fan base likes to take in the work, right? So take in the art. It's interesting.
Or at the very least, what we're conditioned to now.
True.
We don't know any better now. It's book comes out every month and new books come out every week, and so
Yeah.
that was the cycle that we got into however many years ago. So yeah, I mean, I don't know any difference. So yeah, I mean, I said you mentioned Black Side specifically. I will absolutely wait 2 or 3 or 5, however long it takes to get another Black Side book, as long as I know it's coming. I'll wait as long as as long
Oh,
as
for
they're
sure.
as long as they need to get me that book whenever it is, even if it comes in multiple parts, I don't care. But if all the books were like that, I don't know if I could do that.
Mhm.
Like because of that, I mean, I think Black Sad is exceptional anyway. But like
Oh yeah.
maybe I elevate it some because like I wait so long for it, and when it
Hmm.
comes, it's so good. I'm like, oh, it
Yeah.
was so worth the wait. And so if I got to wait again for it, I build it up, and it blows my expectations away. So I don't know if that artificially elevates it, but I mean, like it is incredible book. But like I said, if I had to wait for every book that way, I mean, but I guess if I grew up with it, if that was just how we got our comics, how we consumed them, I wouldn't know any different. But being used to being a Wednesday warrior, being at the shop every Wednesday, and there's going to be something new I'm going to get. There's a level of addiction to that of, and if the book's not there, everyone, if you hear a book gets delayed, it's like, oh, why is it delayed? That's crazy. I can't get the book done on time. And you got to remember
It's
that
really how Diamond became the most hated company in America.
yeah, yeah. If
Because
books
every
don't show
comic
up,
shop owner blames Diamond whenever there's any issue.
yeah.
All right. Alex, can you get us back on?
Oh, sure. I can try here.
You had a couple, but I'm interested in whatever we're talking about, so I'm just too easy to distract.
Well, I guess I do have, this is kind of a larger question, and weirdly, it carries more weight now hearing what you said about the story you heard from your mom about the Cultural Revolution in China and all that, because knowing that was an influence on how you first thought about this book, and then thinking about where the world was in 2016, 2017, as this book was coming out, versus where we are now, as the book has come out again, because one reason this jumped to my mind as a book to talk about was because I saw the solicitation for the complete collection, which as we're recording this now came out about a month or two ago. So
Yeah.
re-releasing this book now, it has a chance to find maybe an audience that couldn't have found it 10 years ago. I know but after you've spent the last handful of years basically being a regular artist in the X office at Marvel, Colin and Jackson have blown up huge
Yeah, oh,
with
yeah.
Star Trek and everything they've done at Marvel and DC. Like you guys are maybe larger names to some more mainstream comic readers. And so this book coming back out, so someone picking it up for the first time, reading about a totalitarian controlled Earth who is cut off from the world, who it hits a lot differently now than it did if you read it when it first came out. And knowing what that initial inspiration for you was, like, how do you look back on some of those themes and lessons that you were trying to put in, or just observations about the world? Like, how do you feel about them now, knowing that this book could find a reader for the first time, today? Like the fact that so much of the book has become more relevant now, and like in none of the good ways, like all the worst. Like, we're closer to the Earth of Joyride now than we were 10 years ago, and that's some scary stuff to think about in some of those
what's
tones.
funny? I not that I hoped this would happen, obviously, but what I had always wanted. I love great sci-fi, and that's what great sci-fi does. I'm not saying that my thing is great, but I mean, in a weird way, I was happy that mine and Jackson and Collins, where our themes, our messages, had the same effect that Star Trek had on me, in the sense that 60s, 70s, and then like say TNG. One specific episode I remember from TNG was the Drumhead. And it was the episode where they thought that there was a spy on the Enterprise, and they found a guy that happened to be half Romulan and half human instead of half Vulcan, and he lied. And there was a trial going on for and it kind of culminated into Picard basically saying that, like, the lesson was that we have to stay vigilant from these people that use an excuse for peace as a way to kind of push their agenda. And that was when I watched that. And I had watched it, I guess I was like pretty much mid-20s. Like I've seen TNG before, but when it came onto Netflix, you got to watch everything from the beginning to the end.
Yeah.
And I finally got to watch all of the episodes of every Star Trek the whole way through, as opposed to, whatever was on syndication at the time. And it was stuff like that I was like, this is the kind of what I wanted to do, is that have a message of what could happen, what might happen, and why it's important to be open to differences and be open to other people that you disagree with, or other people that create different things than you or love different than you. It's just important to have that openness. And I'm glad that it basically that our book has that message that can be, it's not any time period specific, it's evergreen, and it's mostly everything I hope for in what the kind of message we wanted to put out there. So I was really happy about that people feel that way. I hate what we're going through right now, but all the lessons from growing up as a part of an immigrant family in small town Canada, and I grew up in a very conservative part of Canada as well. And I grew up through and I wasn't living in Quebec at this time, but the referendum that happened in Quebec, that they wanted to separate, and then now Alberta wants to separate from Canada. There was a lot of these kind of things that I grew up, and my dad was in politics as well, so I kind of like learn those lessons and study that stuff beforehand, and having the opportunity to kind of play around with all those thoughts in my head of how to kind of tell all the stories in my mind that kind of had, started with, my upbringing. It was just, that's the beauty of art, I think, is having that vehicle, that medium to tell people their message. And you can take it for what it is. That's also the interesting thing about putting your art out there for people to see. Everyone's going to have an opinion, good or bad or neutral. And I think all of that is great. The discussion and talking about it is kind of the best part of it. I love talking good or bad about art, movies, everything. Just this discussion, the discussion of art is so much fun. And again, going back to Joyride, just like, having those same messages with Jackson and Collin, like we had lots of discussions of our upbringing, our growing up, and we tried to channel all that stuff in there. And you could argue our political views, maybe even, but that's, hey, it's our story. We can write it however we want it to, right?
Yeah,
we can have whatever message we want, and and that's the beauty of it, and the connection that we had with the fans and other creators that came from that. So, I mean, long story short, just to answer your question in a more succinct way, but it's I didn't think that this would be more relevant today than it was, but than it would have been. But either way, it's fun to think that I had seen it coming.
Yeah. Well, I think, as you said, I mean, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
No, I was just going to say, I think what makes it evergreen is that you guys have a clearly defined political point of view, but it's not like a partisan thing. It's not like you're taking an issue, one particular stand on one particular side of one particular issue tied to 2015 or 2016. These are sadly evergreen themes that reemerge on very now apparently predictable cycles. I grew up reading about them in history books, and now you end up living through them. So that
now your daughter will go and grow up and reading history books.
Yeah, now my daughter will know about them from a history book.
And I think part of it, and not to go too deep in it, but that's why when we wrote the story, we wanted to set it around the fear of the unknown, because usually it's like X-Men, right? People fear what they don't understand. That was basically a theme to it too, right? That's why we wanted to have a lot of the characters that was fearful of the different. The only person that wasn't was Uma. So she was the example that other people were trying to either push down or follow, because she wasn't scared. I mean, she had a right to be, like, and she learned that later, that, oh man, my actions have consequences to people that I care about. But it was her kind of like fearlessness that pushed beyond, and like, we wanted the characters around her to learn that. We have, when we wrote the story, we had some clear ideas of like, okay, which one of the characters we're going to be changing because of the events of whatever we're writing, and then who are the characters that maybe they will stand pat in their belief of what they think is right. And then we made that choice that Uma was the person that was going to be the person that was like, this is my belief system, take it or leave it. And while the other ones had those kind of hard choices to make. So that's the joy of writing characters, is to you have each character kind of play a role in how either they learn or they don't learn, and what happens when either of those things happen.
I think one thing Mike and I talked about specifically with Uma is that you're right that she is stalwart in her beliefs in terms of how she sees the world. But I think what we loved about her journey was, she starts off and her whole thing is, I got to get out of here. I got to see more. I got to do more, because I know I'm being denied something. I got to see the stars, see the world. It's all about leaving her situation, which you watch this being like a YA kind of focus. That's a very teenage thing, young person thing, right? I got to get out of my town. I got to get out of my state, whatever. I got to go and explore. But in the end, she has the realization of like, she has to go back, not because it's like, I have to go and take what I've learned and actually make my home better.
Yeah.
It's that it isn't just that I see that it's so much better seeing all the world and experiencing all the stuff. Like, I have to put the work in to make it better for everybody. Like, just because I got out, but like Earth is still pretty terrible. So having her that slight perspective shift, but never changing in her beliefs. I think that's something that Mike and I loved about her arc, that, that's a story of coming of age, of growing up, and understanding that it's not just about you. Like you said, she is shown consequences. She's out here acting impulsively, doing the things she wants, and then only then looks back and see all the dominoes that fell, and her having to face that. That's growing up. That's becoming an adult and maturing, and her being able to do that while still holding firm on the way she sees the world, and the way, and I guess in your case, the book's case, the way she sees the galaxy, never changing on that, but having her frame of reference change a little bit, to kind of match her journey and her aging and maturing, was really awesome.
And that's why I felt like that it was really lucky for us to have those 12 issues, and we split it up into 3 volumes. So like, you could even bring it to the Star Wars model, where it's like, you have Luke, that, for New Hope, he's off, he's gone, brash young person doing his own thing, and Empire Strikes Back, all of a sudden I want to do even more, but there are consequences to more. And then obviously in the third one, he has to like finally realize that who he is and what he has to do, and completes the task. So we kind of, when we had the 12 issues, it was like, not to say middle was Empire Strikes Back, but if you were to break it in, like, we had the space to play with that journey, as opposed to if we had 4 issues, I don't know if we'd really be able to get that message across. The story in itself would have been probably really different if it was only 4 issues.
Curious if it only ever stayed that 4 issues and that was all you ever got with the story. What would that arc have been if it was like, we're only getting 4? Do you have any idea what? I mean, you said you had 3 early issues way back in the day. Would it have followed that kind of story there, or like, do you have any sense of what you would have done if you only had 4?
Yeah, I think there would have been maybe a more direct conflict with the government and Uma and her crew. It maybe would have been just more of a straightforward rebellion story. But we got to introduce, obviously, like the regulators and some of the aliens that kind of like would make more of a kind of like a Watchmen type threat, where it's like, okay, now there's like something bigger than us that is our threat than anything else. But and then I don't know if we'd still use the whole like, oh, arts and culture is going to save us from the enemy. Like, I don't know if that would have been the story, but hard to say. I think we got word, I think by issue 2 that we were going to get at least another volume. So yeah,
that's good. Well, and if you only got 4, you wouldn't have got to draw the planet-wide rave party in volume 2. You wouldn't have had the 8th dimensional space whale come in and
I was
grant
like,
her one wish to throw in
I meant to introduce you at the beginning of the podcast as the father of the 8th dimensional whale.
Yeah,
and I just totally whiffed on that one.
Well, so that story came out. So this was the funny thing about it, where say that 8th dimensional whale, it's such a trope, it's such a sci-fi trope of like sea creatures, basically, kind of in some way. You know, Star Trek's done it, and all this.
Everyone's done it. Yeah,
I remember
it's always whales too.
Yeah, well,
whales or squids.
Do you remember this old short story? I don't remember. I read it in school, but it was like a sci-fi short story where aliens came to Earth and they're trying to decide who was the creature that we're going to take with us to our planet to be the representative of Earth. And all the humans were like, oh, who's it going to be? And blah, blah, blah. And at the end, they're like, we took 2 dolphins. And they're like, what? Anyway, like we were talking
a little
about
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah.
So long, and thanks for all the fish.
Yeah. Well, there's lots of other ones. You know, there's Star Trek.
4, right?
Yeah, 4, where they go save the whales, and you know, there's whatever. Name any Star Trek TV show one where the thing is basically a giant space whale or whatever. And we were like, we got to have our own whale somehow. You know, we've got to have this thing. And then so we thought, well, what's the and this is why it was so fun to kind of come up with story ideas. We were like, okay, what's probably one of the first things you would do when your parents are gone? And that was to have a crazy party. So we used that kind of like, you know, 80s teen movie type of, you know, whatever, Porky's, but not as like insensitive.
Yeah.
So, you know, whatever, we were literally throwing all these things in the wall, because like that's the fun thing about like coming up with the stuff was that you know, like, what if we told the story like this, like that movie that we saw? You know, it was always fun to do stuff like that. So that was how we kind of combined those ideas, that volume. I
mean, you even found a way then through that to introduce the regulators, because like the cops come in and break up the party, because that's what happens in the movie, right? You throw the big rager and then someone calls the cops and they show up and everyone's got to scatter, you know?
Super Bad is another one. Like me, Jack, and Collin watched so many movies, and that's why it's fun to, when we got a chance to do something like this, we're like, let's write it like episodes. You know, we write it like episodes, then we can like throw in different things and then switch it up the next episode. And I still really wish that we had the opportunity to do that Breakfast Club bit, but that was more of that would have been a very slow scene type of kind of thing, because they would be obviously exactly like Breakfast Club. They have to, it would have been one of those episodes where, you know, you reveal some history stuff or whatever.
Yeah, a confessional, right? Everyone's got
Yeah, that would have been that episode, and we had this pretty good idea of like they're in space jail, but you know, that just how it is. We had to shelve that for something else to move the story along.
You guys still had something like that, because early on in the first volume, you guys, the story kind of goes out of its way to pair up everyone differently for an issue. You know, like early on, like you have Uma and Catherine together when they have like the mind meld, and then do it like so. Everyone kind of gets put together, and you still get those confessional moments there, character wise. But yeah, if you could have done it in one setting, like Breakfast Club style, that would have been pretty fun.
I mean, we used that obviously because it was like a good way to kind of like transfer the idea that like, you know, they had some secrets or something like that, and they had to find a way to like have it come to surface in a faster way. But half the stuff we came up with, we were just drinking at a bar. Funny, because like even that you know, one episode where they're on that world where all the shifting continents, but they're just
the turtles, yes,
turtles having sex.
Yeah,
Like that was a bar idea for sure. But it was fun. We were like, we were just like, oh man, that wouldn't be so awesome. We were taking from everything. That was the fun part about how to mash sci-fi with a bunch of story ideas that come from inspiration from everything.
That's awesome. Well, I don't know. Do we have anything else, Mike? Any questions before we?
Not on content. Obviously, we want to give you a chance to plug, whatever you're working on next. Obviously, we will once again plug the complete collection of Joyride.
Yes,
because it's an insane deal. It's $20 for 12 issues.
I know it's such a good deal.
Yeah.
It's like thick, lush paper. It's glossy. It's beautiful. But now that I've heard you talk about so many of the like books, shows, movies, things you love, I just have to know what you're currently reading. Like, can you give us either like a top 3, top 5 of either all-time favorite comic series or currently coming out type thing?
Well, comics right now, I'm not reading a ton. I'm reading the new Turtle stuff. I'm still reading the Star Trek stuff, but I'm reading a lot of Star Trek novels. So I've been reading a lot of that. Watching wise, I haven't been watching anything current. Everything I'm watching are really, really bad monster movies. So it makes me think that maybe my next creator own is going to be like a monster movie type, like a really cheesy monster short.
We talking like kaiju kind of monster, or like
I'm talking
Universal
about
Horror
like
Monster?
Universal Horror Monster, but
Okay.
more so like Beware the Blob or It, or and maybe not It, because that's a little bit more horror, but that's kind of a creature movie too, because it ends up like really like 8-legged freaks, like giant spiders.
Okay.
Town,
I think
like
you
that.
just have to wait for like a 25th or 50th anniversary or something, and someone will want to do like, oh, we're gonna do a nostalgia play for this audience, and sometimes they really overestimate the audience when they do that.
Same. I agree. I've maybe this is like a bit of a guilty pleasure, but I think so. So you know how like Danger Girl, right? J. Scott Campbell's Danger Girl.
Yeah.
I thought that was a really fun way of doing it because it was obviously like Indiana Jonesy, kind of like spy and stuff. But in the 90s or 80s and 90s, there was a director named Andy Sedaris, and he did all these B movies with sexy women and men doing secret agent stuff. And I've been thinking about maybe writing a story like that as well. Like that, I think that'd be a lot of fun, cheeky, kind of like not taking yourself too seriously. But these are all just ideas that I've kind of come up with.
Well, it sounds like you've got enough ideas that you could do the one-man version of. I know Alex is going to know what this is called. Pornsack did at Image, like it was like 6 issues that were basically pitches.
The Horizon Experiment.
Horizon Experiment.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah.
But Marcus has his own. He's just gonna write and art 6 completely random stories.
Well, I've been actually the thing that's furthest along is a kung fu story that I'm kind of working on by myself and trying to do something with that. But actual work wise, that I would plug right now, the project I'm working on hasn't been announced yet. It's a Marvel something, so I can't say anything yet.
Okay, all right.
But what's out in stores right now is Time Waits. That I was working with Chip Zdarsky and David Brothers at Distillery. That's out. Kingdom Riders with my friend Shannon Denton at IDW. It's a YA kind of like Death Race 3000, but with giant mythical fantasy beat. So there's that, and then X-Force obviously with Marvel
just
coming
wrapped,
out.
right?
Just wrapped.
Yep.
I was working a ton last year. I was doing double duty for the whole year basically. So I think that's it. And I'm just trying to work on some personal stuff with Raid Studios, which is my artist studio in Toronto, and we're trying to kind of come up with our own stuff right now. So
nice.
Going back to the Joyride thing about creating and appreciating art, like as I said, like I love just making stuff and reading stuff and watching stuff and everything that I can get my hands just fun.
That's awesome. All right, so we'll look for the stuff from Raid. And do you know the Marvel stuff, like when that's going to be announced? Did you have any? It hasn't been yet.
I don't know.
Recording. Okay,
I have no idea, to be honest. They didn't tell me anything. I think it's supposed to be
crazy
out.
How often we hear that on this podcast.
Yeah.
That I got a Marvel thing. Can't tell you about it. Don't know when it'll be out.
So it's possible in a couple of weeks you may hear about what this is, but so something from Marvel coming out on the horizon, and we'll look for whatever you have coming out with Raid and definitely the books. Time Waits was great. I loved that book. A lot of the books from Distillery have been awesome, and they look so good. On the oversized.
Yeah,
they look well. I got to get on the shelf, but I'm saying just in general, the oversized paper and everything like that just looks so phenomenal. So
it was a lot of drawing. Let me tell you.
I would imagine, yeah. Because that little bit of extra, bit of extra on the top and on the side, all of a sudden, your workload must increase exponentially, right?
All right. Then last thing we always do is we will link to all of your social media and things like that on the episode notes. Aside from buying your single issues and trades and everything else, is there a way that people support you? Do you have a Patreon, newsletter? Do you sell original art? Do you do commissions? That type of stuff.
I'm pretty quiet on social media, but you can follow me at Marcus Anthony Toe on Instagram, X or Twitter or whatever is Marcus Toe. Blue Sky is also Marcus Toe. But I am part of an artist bullpen. We're called the Artist Bullpen, and that's where you can find all my original art and commission requests. So the Artist Bullpen, the best way to kind of contact me for that stuff.
Okay,
we'll definitely put a link to that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And I'm, as you can probably tell from my back wall, I am a sucker for acquiring original art. So, I doubt there's any Joyride pieces sitting out there still, but you never know.
I've never sold them. I have.
Oh, really? Wow. Yes. Okay.
So,
well, if you ever choose to, the podcast to reach out to you first, because,
sure.
I'm like, or maybe I just get a commission of the 8th dimensional whale. Like he needs a space on my wall.
Yeah.
So
Mike is the original. Mike's the original art guy. I'm the signed issue guy here.
I love it.
Which
all of it's good.
Yeah, 2018. I think I saw you in Chicago, and I just got to see Jackson and Collin only a handful of years ago for the first time as well. I will say, I remember that was like 2023 or 2024, whatever it was, and I put down 2 issues of Joyride for them to sign. Like they lit up really, like, oh my God, because I think everyone had been bringing like Captain America stuff and things like that, and it was, I think at that point when I saw them, I don't know if they had announced that you were coming on. I don't know if it had been announced that you were going to do an arc on Star Trek, but I had the issues there which you had signed previously, and they were like, by the way, like, we're working with Marcus again. He's coming on to Star Trek, and I don't know if that time it had been announced yet when I saw them at the show. But hearing them be excited, getting to work with you again on a property like that, honestly, and now knowing your Star Trek history, is pretty cool to look back on.
No, honestly, I'm so proud of those guys. Like, I'm so proud that I was kind of like me and them on Hacktivist was our first thing together, and I think it was their first kind of fully published book, I think, and just to see where they kind of came from, where we worked together, they've done such a great job, and I'm so proud of those guys.
That is awesome. That's awesome. Well, listen, I don't think we have anything else.
No, and we've certainly taken enough of your time, given that you're still at work burning the midnight oil now, so we'll let you get back to it.
I'm just doing like manual labor right now, so it's all good.
Oh, even better. So anyway, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Marcus.
Love your work. No. Keep doing it. We'll keep buying it.
Thank you for allowing me to talk Joyride. It was kind of a nice trip down memory lane.
Well, we enjoyed the book an absolute ton, and this was a blast. So thanks so much.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you guys.
Peace.